at the beginning require less sequential additive strategy? And third, does it matter? So early control is going to have a better result as far as complications are concerned. Now, if we go through the regular guideline, which is at present given by ADA ESC combined statement, that first line therapy even today is metformin and comprehensive lifestyle. And if HbA1c is above target, then you have to think for the second therapy. But now, as an add-on, even they have accepted just recently this year, they have accepted that in whatever the HbA1c level is, if person is having a CVD risk factor or CKD risk factor or heart failure as a risk factor, then you can add GLP-1 analog or SGLT2 inhibitor before. And if not tolerated GLP-1, then you can go for DPP-4 inhibitor, as well as other treatments are there. And if you want to reduce hypoglycemic event in your patient, then again DPP-4, GLP-1 analog, SGLT2, and type 2 this TZD are there. So first line therapy is metformin, comprehensive lifestyle modification, and whatever drug comes is coming after this. So drug in combination to act at different physiological level. So by targeting different pathophysiological defect, are we going to get more, or we are just wasting more money and effort in doing that thing? That is to be answered, and that is been answered by this verified trial. So I will go through first to the study design. We have one very good study by now, that glycemic targets for diabetic management, that was shown by a good glycemic legacy in DCCT trial, that is by for type 1 diabetic patient, and for type 2, that is UKPDS trial, and which has shown a early good glycemic control in a de novo patient is always helpful to reduce their complication in the next future 10, 15, 20 years of diabetic life. But on the other side, if we see that there are many drugs which has been used, you can see the very good study from ADOPT, where ADOPT, where metformin was given alone, glyburide was given alone, rosiglitazone was given alone, and any drug whatever you use, they will control sugar for a while, and after 3 years, 5 years down the line, they will require addition of another drug. Though glitazone perform better in comparison to metformin and sulfonylurea. So when we are talking about ECHO trial, VADT trial, that advanced trial, we are talking about stringent glycemic control is not able to reduce CV risk, rather it increases CV risk, because we are treating that patient very late in the stage. So if we want to see the real result, then we should have patient with de novo diabetes, where we are targeting them for strict glycemic control. And for that, we have UKPDS, ADOPT, and now very occasionally we are getting such type of chance, but we do have one study, and that is called Verify study. So Verify study was designed basically a double blind randomized study, where having two arm, it's a parallel group study where 3 week run-in period was there, and the primary defined as failure threshold. So over a 5 year of treatment period, during which patient's treatment is consecutively intensified if clinically indicated. So it is more like a common scenario in our clinical practice rather than a randomized control trial. And though it was randomized and double blind. So what we were doing here, the patient were having more than 18 years of age, but less than 70. Kidney profile was normal, because most of them, rather 100% of them, were new onset diabetic patient. And here type 2 diabetes diagnosis should be less than 2 years. Patient should not be more than 2 years of diabetes. With BMI from 22 to 40, all across the BMI spectrum, patient were enrolled. Patients were drug naive, or max to max, they were being on metformin not for more than 4 weeks. And HbA1c here was not 10, 12, or 8, it was 6.5 to 7.5. That was the key inclusion criteria. There was the running week, 3 weeks running period was there, and then after they were randomized to either villagliptin metformin combination arm or metformin placebo arm, and they were to see that either of this arm patient who were enrolled on either combination or a placebo combination, where the time to failure is there. So after 3 months, confirm 3 months apart, then again we are going for HbA1c. Patients who are having HbA1c of more than 7, they are considered as early failure, which is possible after 6 months, which was kept in this study. After another 3 months, so at 9 months, and for such way, patients were carried forward for 5 years to see if there are few patients who are having non-failure. Means patient either on metformin alone or patient on metformin villagliptin combination, are they having no failure even after 5 years? And that was the primary sense. Then another, this is a primary outcome. So we were saying if patient is on metformin alone or if patient is on combination alone, after 6 months, every 3 months we were evaluating the patient and are they maintaining HbA1c 7 or less or not. Then if person is already on metformin, now patient is not having proper control, that is HbA1c less than 7, then we'll move to combination of metformin to villagliptin. And if patient is on combination therapy and still fail, then there is only insulin was given in this patient. Because here we were seeing that what is the time for secondary failure equals patient to be on insulin. So another thing, along with primary failure, we were also seeing for the secondary failure. Now this is something what we are seeing, that how this combination treatment also fails. So these two periods are there, where one period and second period where patients who were failed were put on either combination or will stay on combination, and later on in period 3 they were put on insulin if it is required. So main results and safety, that is what I am going to discuss of the study. It was done in 34 countries at 254 centers, and more than 2000 people were involved in the study. It is done, it is multicentric, involving, I think, most of the routine countries except US, because villagliptin is not available in US. So US is not there, otherwise everywhere it is there. Patient participants screened 4,500. Out of that, after proper eligibility, only 2001 patients were enrolled, and they were randomized to either combination therapy or monotherapy. So 998 were in early combination and 1003 were in monotherapy group. Race wise, it is equally distributed, but most of the patients were Caucasian, and women were around similar, 50, around 50-55% of the women were there. Age, the mean age, basic characteristic was 54. Type 2 diabetes for around 3 to 4 months, that was the mean duration, not very old. And HbA1c entry mean was 6.7 in both the group. Weight was almost similar in both the groups. So it was ideally matching, control group is matching the treatment group also. And the primary analysis was to see the time to confirm initial treatment failure. And secondary analysis was progression of HbA1c after the start period of 2 to end period of 2, and assessed by the rate of loss in glycemic control over time. Progression of fasting blood glucose over time assessed by estimated annualized slope. Change in HbA1c based on characteristic, and safety and tolerability was also seen. An exploratory analysis was done as annual meal test, HOMA method, to see the beta cell function, insulin resistance, and educated cardiovascular event. Definitely, this was not a cardiovascular outcome study. So the cardiovascular event here were adjudicated for exploratory analysis, not as a primary or secondary goal. So what was the outcome as far as primary analysis is concerned? Rate of failure is calculated in each strategist group. by an assessment of those failing as a proportion of all those in that group. And you can see that initial treatment failure, the hazard ratio is 0.51. So 49 percentage reduction in initial treatment failure. So if you combine Villagliptin with metformin, a DPP4 inhibitor with an insulin sensitizer at very early stage of diabetes, the overall failure is very less. And I think similar type of result we all have seen in our practice when we kept patient on Villa Sita with metformin combination when 2008-9 when we have started. I think there are number of patients who are still maintaining a good result after 7-8 years of uh, that therapy, and that itself suggests that combination always works well. Here you can see that overall initial therapy, monotherapy was able to sustain HbA1c less than 7 for 36 months, while it was increased to 61.9 months. So primary analysis was in favor of combination treatment. Now, what about secondary analysis? Now, in secondary analysis, the time to second failure where insulin was initiated, again the hazard ratio is 0.74, so 26 percentage reduction in secondary failure and requirement of insulin is concerned. As far as slope of glycemia is concerned, you can see number of patients. Blue is with combination and the fluorescent green is for initial monotherapy with metformin alone. You can see number of patients with less than HbA1c 7. You can see even further HbA1c less than 6.5. Then the gap is even further. And if you see how many patients are there where HbA1c is actually less than 6, because when a young person with type 2 diabetes of less than 2 years is coming to my clinic, I always tell them why 6.1, why 6.3, why 6.5. I want HbA1c of 5.7 or 5.8 without hypoglycemia, so as not just to reduce microvascular complication. If you really want to control macrovascular complication, then patient should have less than 6 HbA1c, and that is without hypoglycemia. And here the drug combination is not causing hypoglycemia. That is another added advantage. If we analyze subgroup wise, patients who are having HbA1c less than 7 or between 7 to 7.5, still the hazard ratio was maintained same. BMI, age, gender, smoking doesn't matter. Combination treatment is still better. So it is almost same irrespective to whatever the subgroup is there, including EGFR levels. Because in whatever EGFR, even though it is maintained well, the benefit maintained same, and it is irrespective to race as well as geographic region also. Now, along with that, if we are giving combination treatment, if we are targeting HbA1c of 6, there is always one important question: do this patient gain weight more than expected? You can see the combination treatment and metformin alone. Definitely, slightly more weight gain was there in comparison to metformin alone, but it was of no significance because that was within window of 1 kg. So this is very important thing. But at the same time, we also see, is there any significant hypoglycemic event? See, by virtue of action, DPP4 inhibitor causes very less hypoglycemia, metformin almost nil hypoglycemia, and you can see the similar thing with metformin only 0.9% and hypoglycemic event was 1.3% when combination was given early. Along with that, is there any extra serious side effect, drug related adverse effect or severe adverse effect which led to discontinuation of treatment was almost similar, and there was of no statistical significance. So this therapy accepted well, and it is not having any other extra baggages with it if you are giving it early. What about other routine special interest are there, that arthralgia, neoplasm, especially people were worried about pancreatitis. There were actually initially URTI and UTI, urinary tract infection were already there, where which was expected that I think if other people can mute yourself, then it will be better because it is disturbing the flow of presentation. Urinary infection URTI were also expected to be very high in DPP4 group, which was actually by after 10 years we are hardly worried about, but it was seen as an adverse effect, and you can see there was no significant side effect was found in combination group in comparison to metformin alone. So that was the secondary analysis where secondary failure, slope of glycemia, HbA1c change, as well as safety and tolerability was assessed for this combination therapy in comparison to monotherapy alone. And there are exploratory analyses are also there where we were thinking for adjudicated cardiovascular event. And you can see that total confirmed adjudicated cardiovascular event was 30 in combination group, and initial monotherapy were having 44 numbers. So this is also very important that hazard ratio here is 0.71, but confidence interval is 1.19. So when confidence interval crosses 1, it is having less significant, but it reduces macrovascular event too. And that is very important. So safety and what the basic answer we were having at the start of this verify study, that do this type 2 diabetic patient benefit from having combined therapy at the beginning of their pharmacological treatment? Then answer is yes. It reduces by 49 percentage, and it is more durable, low risk of hypoglycemia, no body weight gain. Patient adherence to therapy is also very good because there is no serious side effect, and possibly it reduces clinical inertia because many times it happens that we also are not putting patient on early combination therapy when actually it is needed, and offering more opportunity to address his individual patient's need. What about the second question about secondary failure and sequential treatment? Yes, again the answer is it reduces by 26 percentage as far as third treatment addition, especially in form of insulin is there. So ADA ESD consensus report after all these things, that while there is some support of initial combination therapy due to greater initial reduction of HbA1c can be provided by metformin alone, there is little evidence that this approach is superior to sequential addition of medication for maintaining glycemic control or slowing progression of diabetes. And thereby, we need to answer this third: does it matter? Because if we put SGLT2, EMPA-REG has shown us to reduce cardiovascular mortality and heart failure by 17% and 33%. Here, definitely this is not a cardiovascular outcome study, and I don't say that this is a CVOT study for villagliptin. It is some adjudicated macrovascular event which were found with p-value of 0.19, where hazard ratio found to be 0.71. So definitely 29% reduction. But what I already told, that confidence interval is 1.19. So it is having slightly less significant in comparison to primary and secondary outcome. But this suggests that over the period of 5 years of treatment in a drug naive or early diabetic patient, combination therapy do well. And one thing which I would like to show in this particular path, that after 6 months to 12 months only, that both the curve get separated, and that maintains throughout the 5 years. And that is also very important, that there is a distinct difference between initial monotherapy and early combination therapy as far as difference is concerned. So verify strength is not like ACCORD or ADVANCE or VADT trial. It is on newly diagnosed type 2 diabetic patient coming to your and my OPD daily. It is having diverse, geographically distributed and multi-ethnic population, long study duration because it is more than 5 years of duration. It is well tolerated with no unexpected or new safety finding, and reproducibility in glycemic durability in an international heterogenic population. So definitely this study weighs more. But yes, there are few things which I would like to show as a limitation of therapy, that here the assessment was done only one treatment combination. We are not giving Actually, this study was started far before EMPA-REG. So this study is not suggesting a combination of SGLT2 inhibitor with vildagliptin or SGLT2 inhibitor with metformin also. And there is a very narrow range. You can see the HbA1c patient were having 6.5 to 7.5. So patient coming to you for the first time with new onset diabetes with HbA1c of 13, then such type of patient are not addressed here. I feel, sorry, I feel if it was included, result must be far better than what it was, because in clinical practice we have seen that patient with leukotoxicity HbA1c may be 10 or 11 initially, but even with this dual therapy they come down to 6.5 beautifully without hypoglycemia with a very well tolerated dose. So this is very important. So just to have just a fast recap, that early combination therapy is anytime better than initial failure or giving monotherapy and a stepwise approach. Median time to failure was 3 years with initial monotherapy, which was compared to over 5 years in early combination therapy. And when all patients were receiving combination therapy, the risk of treatment failure second time is reduced by 26%. And both approaches were very safe and well tolerated. So early combination therapy is very good. Here, I would like to say ADA might have taken years together to have this early combination therapy, but as an Indian doctors were always give combination therapy for blood pressure, for sugar control, for tuberculosis, for malaria. Even if you can see that tuberculosis malaria treatment, it was to be given only chloroquine. Now we are approaching with 2 or 3 drugs at a time. Similarly, treat such type of disease aggressively. And if you have an agent which causes less or no hypoglycemia, then they are always preferred. So instead of SU and metformin, which is a common practice in Indian doctors, that we put in a patient with high sugar at the time of approach, I would suggest why not triptin with metformin therapy, and you can have a beautiful result like Verify has stated us in form of a long duration of good glycemic control without hypoglycemia with good tolerability, and that is for over more than 5 years. So that is what I would like to end with, and I think we can take answer. I think later
Yes, sir.
when we are going to have both the presentation to be in. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. It was a really wonderful presentation, giving us the thorough insight into Verify trial and also giving your personal viewpoint on this. So let's move on to the second part of the session, the second scientific session, which is on the telemedicine, past, present, and future. So you all agree with me, we are in a very difficult time. World has changed. There is a lot of changes happened in our personal, social, occupational, and professional life. So one of the thing is that the patient contact and then meeting the patient, etc., has becoming little difficult in the time of COVID-19. So there are a lot of digital activities coming up. One important digital activity is telehealth or telemedicine. So telemedicine is not new. Actually, in India also, India too adopted this concept of telemedicine way back in 1975 and started its journey from Jia Medical College at Gwalior. From the time its inception, telemedicine has many changes, and today with the advent of technology and good network, it's really reaching across the country. It's easier even in the remote places. It's possible to reach the patient. So at this juncture, taking into the seriousness of the situation and the toughness of the times, telemedicine also been received government approval. So to tell us more about telemedicine, how was it, what is the present, what will be in future, and then give us his guidance and his recommendation, as well as giving us some practical tips on telemedicine and the usage, we have with us eminent speaker, Dr. Jimmy Vadgama. So can I have his introductory slide, please? Can you see the slide? Yeah. Right. So, I know all of you know Dr. Jimmy Vadakama. He is not new to all of you. He does not require introduction. As I will say, I just doing my formality with a proud privilege and honor. I am introducing Dr. Jimmy Vadakama. Doctor is fellowship in endocrinology, diabetes, and metabolism from Mumbai, MD Medicine, and he has done CDIAP. Dr. Vadgama is a consultant endocrinologist, diabetes specialist, and metabolic physician at Surat. He's the author of RSSDI Guideline for Inpatient Management of Hyperglycemia 2016. He is executive editor of RSSDI Textbook of Diabetes 4th edition. He has received several awards, and to name a few, he is the recipient of 2019 Rising Star Award from Indian Academy of Diabetes and TYSA, the National Award winner in 2016. He is a member of American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, USA. He was a former assistant professor of medicine, GMC Surat. He has numerous original research papers to his credit, and it has been published in various national and the international journal. So today we are fortunate to have you with us, sir. Warm welcome to you. It's our privilege to have you here with us in this scientific session. May I now request you to deliver a lecture on telemedicine, past, present, and future. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction. So, I think everyone can hear me. Voice is
Yes,
clear.
very clear, sir.
Yeah. So, as you have correctly said, we are going through a strange era. We know the world has changed in last few months, and one of the important thing is the healthcare delivery that we are facing so many hurdles right now. The chronic patients, they are also suffering in view of the fear and anxiety regarding getting the new infection, COVID-19 infection. So new concept has come again in the light, which was there previously. It has been there in the past, and now everyone needs to learn about it and needs to practice about it. That will be the time in future that each and every one of us will need to practice this telemedicine. So this is a primer about telemedicine, what was in the past, future, and currently what we can do. So this is a little bit primer about the telemedicine part, and we'll quickly go through it. So we'll see what is the definition, what was the history of telemedicine, and why it is needed in India, what are different types of telemedicine, any legal trendings or requirements, what will the actual benefit for doctors and patients, and what will the future. So we will quickly go through it. So what was the definition given by World Health Organization? WHO has said that telemedicine is delivery of healthcare services, where distance is the critical factor, and it can be done by all healthcare professionals using via which information and communication technology for exchange of valid information. So this is using of information and communication technology. From that, we can exchange some valid information. For what purpose? For the medical part. So it is for the diagnosis, it is for the treatment also, it is for the prevention of the disease also and injuries. It can be for research and evaluation also. And what we are currently doing, it is for continuing education of healthcare providers also. So this is very, very important. So this can be so the wide scope of telemedicine, and it can be done all in the interest of advancing the healthcare of individuals and our community. So this was the definition by WHO. Recently, in view of the COVID-19 pandemic, Government of India has also revised, or actually first time given some telemedicine practice guidelines to enabling all the registered medical practitioners to provide healthcare using telemedicine. So they also define telehealth as the delivery and facilitation of health and health-related services, including medical care, provider and patient education. Provider education means what we are doing now, a CME or continued medical education. Patient education also, health information services also, even self-care via telecommunication and digital communication technologies. So in past also, how the telemedicine evaluated. So it was first conceptualized in 1924. A magazine had shown a telemedicine picture, and it was considered as a science fiction in 1924, around 100 years back. But the actual implementation was done in 1967 by Dr. Jay Sanders. He sometimes is considered as father of telemedicine. He initially first set up the telemedicine at Boston Logan Airport, and he connected to his hospital in 1964. So this was the first in the world. In India also, telemedicine is very old. No? One of the oldest known telecardiology system for teletransmission of ECGs was established in Gwalior in GR Medical College in 1975. So it belongs to very long old time also. Even the not allopathy, even the first Ayurveda telemedicine center was established in India in 2007 by Dr. Pratap Chauhan. Okay, so why we need telemedicine in India? Okay, we know that in India the healthcare is totally unorganized. There are three main level of care, healthcare in India. We know that primary care level, where around 23,000 primary healthcare centers are there, and which overtakes the around 1.5 lakh sub centers also. Above the primary care, we have secondary care like secondary health center around 3,000. We have 4,400 district hospitals also, and 1,200 other public hospitals also. Over and above, we have around 250 medical colleges in India and 200 dental colleges. So this is the level-wise healthcare in India, and we are seeing a very huge gap. You know, being a 250 medical college to around 1.5 lakh sub-centers. So this is a huge gap, and we know that around 70% of Indian population live in the rural area, and we have 90% of secondary and tertiary care facilities are they are in the cities and towns. There is a huge gap. So we also know there is low penetration of healthcare services in the rural area and peripheral areas. There is lack of investment in healthcare, especially in rural areas. Even the healthcare investment by government is also very low. The percentage of GDP given to the healthcare is also very less. We have also inadequate medical facilities in rural areas. One of the very, very important thing is the problem of retaining doctors in rural area. Specifically, we are talking about the specialist and the super specialist doctor. So this was a survey showing the need for specialists in rural areas. Okay, what is needed as a telemedicine consultation in periphery areas. So you can see from the graph, 34% requires psychiatry, 29% for dermatology, endocrinology for 9%, pediatric neurology for 5%, even nutrition service, dietitians 4%, and others they included 19%. So definitely there is need for this, but we know the Indian scenario. No? India has a very huge amount of surface area, huge population, more than 130 crore people are living in India. There is very, very huge divide between urban and rural areas. The other problem is inaccessible areas due to lack of infrastructure. We have hilly regions, islands, deserts, coast, tribal areas. But to our advantage, being an IT country, which is India is also known as IT country, we have strong 4G network and bandwidth. And we are one of the cheapest country in the world to provide 4G internet services. We have, even with the help of ISRO, we have indigenous satellite technology also. We are not dependent on others also for this information technology. We have human resources for the India is IT hub, where so we are exporting so many IT trained professionals all over the world, and we have already successfully concluded, or we are successfully running some pilot projects for this telemedicine also. Few of the examples you can see here: the Asha Jyoti from Chandigarh, the SGPCI mobile telemedicine bus, even the AIMS Cochin runs the telemedicine bus also. So what are the types of telemedicine? You must be wondering how telemedicine can work in different ways. So what different types of telemedicine we can practice? So it can be an interactive telemedicine services. A doctor, I am speaking to a patient directly sitting in the rural area or periphery. It can be a specialist and primary care consultation also. I, as a specialist, can be consulting a doctors or a medical officer at the health center remotely who have facilities for telemedicine. Store and forward telemedicine and remote monitoring. There are two examples. How we can then store and forward mean you record some health data and you store it and you forward it to a consultant or specialist far away, and then they recognize it and they diagnose it. Then they either they diagnose it or they add a treatment protocol and they revert back. So one example will be a kind of tele-electrocardiography, or we are seeing so many years that ECG is recorded at a place and it is transmitted digitally to a cardiologist or a physician. He records, he diagnoses the ECG and gives his advices. Similarly, in diabetology also we are seeing this kind of practice in fundus examination. Due to lack of timing and all those things and lack of ophthalmologists available, we are now doing what we call fundus non-mydriatic fundus examination, and these photos are captured and they are sent to the telemedicine center, and the ophthalmologist there, they immediately within minutes or hours they give the reports, and it can be printed back to the patient at our center. Remote monitoring can also be done. We are seeing this in the COVID era also, that for example in COVID ICU, all the parameters, vitals monitoring from a patient's bedside monitor, it is transmitted to a single center and it can be remotely monitored also. A chief intensivist can monitor all the 10, 20, 50 patients' data at the same time from the remote monitoring center. Imaging services, very, very important thing. And we are practically using it. All radiologists, at some point of time, they are using it. Suppose a patient comes for a head injury and he needs an immediate CT scan at 3 a.m. in the night. People are doing CT scan. The technicians are doing CT scan for the patient. He immediately uploads the images to a software, and software can be accessed with all the data at the radiologist who is sitting or sleeping at his home, and he can quickly go through all these slices, CT scan slices, and he can give the diagnosis. And the technician at the other end can print the report and give back to the patients. So immediately, without the radiologist coming to the CT scan center, he can do it. So this is what we are commonly seeing also. So for doctors, it can have many advantages also. What are the advantages? Especially in India, we are seeing providing healthcare to every individual is challenging. Given the large population, geographical distances, and limited resources also. It saves cost for rural patients. It avoids unnecessary travel times and losing of the daily wages also. Suppose a patient worker travels from rural area to a civil hospital in tertiary care. He need to lose his daily wages. He need to lose his wages for the day. He cannot work for that. He also needs to travel. Sometimes he needs a special vehicle, ambulance also to travel to Surat or a tertiary center. And sometimes it can give timely and faster access also. So what happens? Even the patient needs to travel to the OPD of a specialist or travel to a tertiary center. He can definitely access the date. He can consult there and he can immediately get the response. It can be a good model for routine follow-ups in chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension. And many of our fellow colleagues have started this also since many years. That for initial consultation, definitely patients come to the hospital for these chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, hypothyroidism. The follow-up of these patients many a times, or even for simple dose adjustments, or even for simple insulin dose adjustments, the telemedicine can do a wonderful things. And it can reduce the burden of secondary hospitals also. If the patients are managed at primary level only, it can reduce the burden on hospital. So there are some legal standings also with the new guidelines also, but it comes under all the following clinical medical acts that are already present in India. And another thing, still these acts are not clear cut. Okay. So precaution has to be kept by all the medical practitioners to follow these guidelines as much as possible, because still the guidelines, they are not clear. They do not look clear. We will see it. So in India, till now, there was no legislation or guidelines for practice of telemedicine through video, photo, or internet platforms. The existing provisions, all the medical provision acts, they primarily govern the practice of medicine and information technology. Still, there are gaps in the legislation and uncertainty of rules, and they pose a huge risk for both doctors and patients also. Okay. So what is the current guidelines says? What is the purpose of giving telemedicine? So purpose of these guidelines is to give practical advice to the doctors so that all the services and models of care used by the doctors, healthcare are encouraged to consider use of telemedicine as a part of normal practice. These guidelines will assist the medical practitioner in pursuing the sound course of action to provide effective and safe medical care founded on current information, available resources, and the patient needs to ensure patient safety, and even for provided our safety also, doctor's safety. So what is the scope of these guidelines? within the broad paradigm of telemedicine, this guideline will be published under Indian Medical Council Act and are for provided access only. So these guidelines are meant for registered medical practitioners under the IMC Act 1956. All the registered medical practitioners are under the scope of these guidelines. It covers norms and standards of the medical practitioner consultation via telemedicine. And telemedicine includes all channel of communications with the patient that leverage information technology platforms, including voice, audio, text, or even digital data exchange. So this guideline doesn't include following things. So this exclusion you need to remember clear cut. So this guideline doesn't give any specification for hardware or software, infrastructure, building or maintenance, anything. So hardware and software specifications are not there in this guideline. So as such, you can use any type of hardware, any type of software. It even very important thing, it doesn't even specify the encryption part of the data. So your data cannot be safe. We are seeing so many data breach or safety breach nowadays. When there was so much concern about this Zoom platform also, which now has been revised and rectified now. But similar security concerns are there regarding the safety of the data and encryption of the data. That is still a big problem, and that is not included in these guidelines. And another is the data management systems involved, standards of the software, standards of the software, and interoperability of the system. We are seeing huge amount of surge in these telemedicine platforms, and still there are no recommendation for any standard or interoperability. What is that? If I'm using one particular EMR and I want to switch to another particular EMI, all my data cannot be transferred to a newer system. Suppose I am here and I'm shifting to another hospital, the data cannot be shifted to the another system. So these are the big lags about the standards and interoperability. Compared to USA has standard EMR. Many developed countries have a national EMR systems where it is standardized everywhere in a whole country, and it has interoperability also. But this has been not done in these guidelines. In my opinion, these current newer government guidelines, they are incomplete, and this will create more confusion in future. And this also excludes the use of digital technology to conduct surgical or invasive procedures remotely. We are seeing so many robotic surgeries now. They have facilities to conduct this surgery remotely also, like Da Vinci systems, but these are not included in guidelines, and the government has not given any idea or any recommendation for them. Other aspect of telehealth, such as research and evaluation and continued medical education of healthcare workers, still there is no guideline in this included here, and it does not provide any guide for consultation outside the India. So outside jurisdiction of India, you cannot practice telemedicine at this point of time. Okay, so one very important thing is all practitioners are entitled to practice telemedicine in the same professional and ethical norms and standard as applicable to the traditional in-person care, or with the increasing institution and telemedicine. So you should enable this guideline should enable all those practitioners who want to practice telemedicine get familiar with guidelines, as well as all the process limitation of So I think some voice is coming. Can we mute others?
Requesting everyone to please mute your mic.
Okay. So government is planning. So they have said clear cut in there, an online program will be developed and made available to the Board of Governors in superstition with Medical Council of India. So all registered medical practitioners who are intending right now to provide an online consultation need to complete a mandatory course within 3 years of its notification. So still government has not given, but it has said that within 3 years of the notification of such program, all the medical practitioners need to complete this program. In the interim period, which we are going through right now, the principles mentioned in this guideline need to be followed, and thereafter undergoing or qualifying such a course as prescribed will be essential prior to practice of telemedicine. So we can, this guideline says what we can use. So tools for telemedicine, practically we can use anything. We can use a simple telephone, video devices connected over local area network or wide area network, or even the internet also, mobile phone also, landline phone also. Government says we can use chat platform also like WhatsApp, Facebook, etc. Even for mobile apps or internet-based digital platforms like we are seeing in Docon and Helpflix and all those things, we can use it. So they are open to everyone. You can use any platform. The important thing is now the patient's consent. Okay, if you want to consult a patient as in OPD or in telemedicine, we know that patient consent is required. So for telemedicine also same applies. The consent can be implied or explicit. If the patient initiate telemedicine on his own hand, then the consent is implied. Patient is starting telemedicine from his own side. Suppose I want to consult Dr. Piyush Desai and I start the telemedicine from my side, then the consent is said to be implied from my side, that I have already given consent that I want to consult Dr. Piyush on telemedicine platform. What is an explicit consent? It is needed if the healthcare worker or registered medical practitioner or caregiver initiates a telemedicine consult. Suppose I call Dr. Piyush that I want to consult you. He said that, wait, there is a COVID pandemic going on. You consult me on the telemedicine platform. Then he sends me a forms, or I give my explicit consent to him in any of the recorded form to him that I want to consult you via telemedicine. So it is appropriate that I will consult you and you give me the appropriate treatment. So all registered medical practitioners must record these in these patient records also. So some of the newer platforms, electronic medical records or telemedicine platforms, which are now coming, they have inbuilt consent in that. If patient agrees, then only, and if the patient gives consent, then only the consultation can go on. Otherwise, it is stopped at that point of time. So basically, there are two types of telemedicine consultation. We all know as proper OPD physical consultation. It is either new or first consultation and follow-up consultation. So first consultation is also been defined here. So it includes consulting with the doctor for the first time, or if the patient has consulted doctor earlier, but more than 6 months have left since the previous visit or previous consultation, or the patient has consulted doctor earlier for a different health condition. So either 6 months have gone for the same condition, or patients want to consult you for another condition, then it will be considered as the first consultation. So how does everything goes after the consent? You can teleconsult with either video, audio, or text. Okay, you identify the person. This is very, very important thing. And the newer guidelines, they have a pattern or the system of one-time password, OTP system. If you are registered, you are from a registered mobile number and you give the OTP and you are authenticated by that way also. You give the consent, implied consent, patient gives implied consent, or you take a explicit consent as we discussed. You quickly assess that if that is an emergency or non-emergency. So this is the first phase of triage. You triage all the patients who require an emergency care. You advise them some precaution or give them an immediate referral to a particular center. Go there and you do the emergency care. Okay. If it is not an emergency and you find that the patient is ready or acceptable for a teleconsultation, you should take maximum history from the patient, maximum investigation report, blood reports, all types of investigation you record it. Past medical records you can ask for additional information, same as what we are taught in our medical college, that how to take history. And registered medical practitioner may switch the mode of communication if required. If I want to see a patient's examination something, or I want to see for pallor or icterus something, from the audio chat I may switch to video chat also. Okay, so if you have taken history and now you have to think that the case is appropriate for management of telemedicine or not. Many of the patients, you can feel that they are not appropriate for online consultation. You can refer them an in-person consultation. You can call them for the OPD. If you think they are appropriate for this management online, you can give them 3 main parts: health education, counseling to specific clinical condition, and you can give the specific treatment in the form of medicine. So in case you can do it. If it is done in the consultation is done on video consultation, you can given prescribed medicine from this list. This list we also see now. Okay, medicine list is the OTC. We will see this, discuss it. So before that we'll see what is follow-up consultation. Follow-up consultation means patient is consulting with the doctor within the 6 months. When previous consultation is there, but within 6 months, okay, or previous in-person consultation or telecommunication. However, it cannot be consulted as follow-up if there are new symptoms which are not in the spectrum of the same previous health condition, or the doctor does not recall the contents of the previous treatment and advice. So that it is called as newer. So suppose the patients come for follow-up. So how will you go? Same way, either you do by video, audio, or test. You take the history, even your previous consultation history also, the newer EMRs and newer telemedicine softwares, they have this inbuilt that when the patient logs in or gives you for follow-up, immediately see the previous consultation in front of you. Okay. So again, you take the implied consent or explicit as we have discussed. You quickly assess again that it tries it for if there is an emergency or non-emergency. If it is non-emergency, you see that it can be taken for a teleconsultation or not. If cannot be patient cannot be kept for teleconsultation, you advise him to come for a actual physical visit. And again, for the same thing, for follow-up consultation, you see if it is a continuation of care, same complaint, same disease which was previously consulted, give them health education, counseling also, and previous treatment also. If you find that there is something new complaint or something new disease is there, and you again follow the guideline for the first consultation. Okay, so there are three main things here in the consultation. If the condition you think can be appropriately managed by telemedicine, there are three main things. You first and foremost is to provide health education, whatever is the condition. You provide the counseling related to specific condition. And third one is the prescribed medicine. So prescribing medicine via telemedicine is at the professional discretion of the doctor. So as such, we know from the initial acts, all medical acts that are exist in India, that we can prescribe medicines even the same way as the proper physical consultation via telemedicine at the professional discretion of our knowledge and our degree. So whatever we feel is good, and we should do it according to our discretion. Doctor may prescribe via telemedicine only if two conditions are met. If they feel that you have gathered adequate information about the patient's medical condition, and secondly, you prescribe the medicine are in the best interest of the patients. So these are again from the same guidelines what we are taking for the physical consultation. So prescribing medicines without appropriate diagnosis or even provisional diagnosis will amount to professional misconduct. So this is very important. Only prescribe medicine if you feel that you have adequate information such amount to such a level that now you can safely prescribe medicine to the best interest of the patient. And there are some specific restrictions also. So what are they? And depending upon the type of consultation, the categories of medicines that can be prescribed via teleconsultation will be notified by the central government in future time to time. So it will be updated. Okay. But right now what we have given three lists. List 2 medicine, that is also called OTC solutions, that a patient even can simply go to medical store and buy without a prescription also, like paracetamol, ORS solutions, cough lozenges, etc. List A includes that you can give refill category drugs via in first consultation who have done who have been done telemedicine by video consultation. Like if you do if you discuss a patient on video consultation and patient is having a diabetes, chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension, you can prescribe him an OAD, anti-diabetic drug or antihypertensive that are included in the list A. List B includes patient undergoing follow-up consultation, in addition to those which have been prescribed in previous person consultation for the same medical condition. Very, very important thing for you to notice, and don't make this mistake. Prohibited taste scheduled X drugs such as narcotic, they are prohibited to write on this telemedicine. This is same. Okay. So very, very important thing as we know about the misconduct. Okay. as in medical practice, even routine medical practice, what we are seeing, misconduct also applies to the telemedicine consultations. Okay. So all the general medical requirements under MCA Act or professional conducts, even ethics also will be applicable to telemedicine. Okay. What are the few examples? Suppose a doctor insisting for a telemedicine consultation when the patient is willing to travel or medical condition which requires in-person consultation. Suppose patient requires a physical consultation and the doctor is insisting the patient that do not come and please consult me online. Okay. In that time, if sometimes the patient feels or some complication arises, the patient can arise this point and it can be considered as a misconduct. You can, doctors sometimes misusing the images, data, especially the private and sensitive in nature. If you misuse them for your research publication without proper consent, then it can be also a misconduct. The doctor sometimes uploads the X-ray picture of the patient on social media or shares in the group without the consent of the patient. That can be also considered as a misconduct on the part of the doctor. Doctor should not at all prescribe medicine which are from the restricted list, like narcotics. Okay. And penalties. So government has specified the penalties will be similar to the Indian Medical Council Act and ethics and other prevailing laws. And sometimes these laws can be different from each medical councils also. So you need to remember what in your state, what are the laws. Okay. So records, very, very important thing. It is advisable to maintain the records for the prescribed time. Log or record all telemedicine interactions such as phone logs, email, text, record, or voice interactions. Patient records such as reports, images, diagnosis data, etc. You also should keep with you, and strictly maintain the prescription shared either digitally or non-digitally with you. So newer telemedicine platforms and EMR softwares, they have this facility to record all these things. Whatever communication was done, whatever the reports that have been given by the patients, and what reception given by the doctors to the patient. So all this is recorded in the newer telemedicine softwares. Fees wise, as we know about the actual clinical physical consultation, and teleconsultation should be treated as the same way. So doctor can charge their stipulated consultation fee, provided they should also give the receipt or invoice for the fees they have charged, and they should also notify them. So the advance. So you can charge anything, whatever is your you are charging for your patients. Okay. So what are the benefits for the healthcare doctors? So okay, as a doctor, if you start practicing, what will depend? You can sometimes have improved diagnosis and better treatment management also. You can have continuing education and training like what we are going right now. You can have quick and timely follow-up of discharged patients like what we are practicing. That suppose a patient is discharged from the hospital, we give them phone number for insulin dose adjustment. Suppose a patient is taking insulin in hospital and at home, everything changes. He will require some form of support for the insulin dose adjustment. So this can be a very good thing for follow-up and of discharged patients. And we can access to computerized comprehensive data of patients both offline and real time. And this data is very, very important for our research and paper publication. You are seeing hundreds of patients daily, but if you are not keeping your data, then you can't do any research from that. You cannot publish them, cannot make papers out of them. So this EMR platform and telemedicine software, they have a big benefit that you can have all your data together. You can analyze them and you can publish some of the papers. For patients, as we already discussed, this can be so much beneficial from them. Early diagnosis and treatment, access to a specialized healthcare service. Suppose a patient living in a rural area wants to consult a neurophysician here, which he cannot get in his village. He can have via telemedicine. He can have early diagnosis and treatment. He can access to expertise from medical specialties. He has benefits of physician's fee reduced via telemedicine, even cost of medicine. He has a benefit of reduced visits to the specialty hospital. Suppose a rural patient comes to a nursery center, he needs to lose his daily wages. He is losing his work for the day. He is losing money for the transportation also. Sometimes a special vehicle or ambulance needs to be there. So travel expenses are also less. Even sometimes early detection of disease is there by the specialist advice, and reduce burden of the morbidity overall in the society. The last, what will be the future of telemedicine? So we are seeing so much advances in this field: radiology, cardiology, psychiatry, pathology, dentistry, pharmacy. We are seeing these multiple advances right now. And even seeing the pharmacy part also, telemedicine and telepharmacy is going on, and with patients as a e-business model. Pharmacy is getting a huge bump. Patients are ordering medicines online, so pharmacy is getting huge bump. Dentistry was also getting pathology. We are seeing not only for the pathologists are signing reports online, even the slides, in slides from the histopathological specimen, they are getting reviewed from the higher centers also, and we are seeing good amount of or high specificity and sensitivity for the diagnosis by expert opinion elsewhere. Even psychiatry is also seeing for frequent follow-up, it was not possible. And cardiology, we are seeing now demonstration of newer technologies that someone from far else or at the end of the corner, they are doing remote angioplasty. And we are seeing now newer and newer robotics that are getting included. We are, you must be aware of this robotics getting implemented in the COVID hospitals also. Remote surgeries that be getting developed day by day. As I given an example of the Da Vinci surgery protocol, remote or robotic surgery, live monitoring via cell phones. Okay, now we are seeing this, and actually at present also we are seeing in the form of continuous glucose monitoring, like a Medtronic sensor is there that can give you real-time monitoring of your blood sugar level on your phone, and it can inform your family members also regarding your current blood sugar level. So future is coming very quickly, and in the end I would like to say that telemedicine is even a one small step for information technology, but it can become a giant leap for healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think please some of you should mute your mic. Okay. Sir, it was very wonderful. You gave us the proper insight into, I think many, Mr. Sarangi, some of them I can mute it, some of them I'm not able to mute. Can you mute everybody's mic? A lot of noise. Some I could do myself, but some I'm not able to do. Okay. Sir, thank you, sir. Thank to how it is developing and what are the advantages and what the future hold it for us. And I request the participants to post your question, or you can unmute your mic and even ask the question. There are a couple of questions I will start asking them here. There is one question, sir, Dr. Piyush Desai, for you.
Yes.
Metformin plus vildagliptin in impaired renal function patient, Dr. Nimesha.
Yeah. First of all, both drug cannot be given in patient with severe renal dysfunction. Vildagliptin can be used in a reduced dose, because if eGFR is less than 45, then you have to make vildagliptin once. That is 50 milligram once a day instead of 50 milligram twice daily, which is the ideal dose if there is renal insufficiency. As far as metformin is concerned, less than eGFR 30, you should not initiate metformin. If you have continued with metformin, it should be a very minimal possible dose of metformin, and you should be watchful for acidosis also. If it is between 30 to 45, you may continue with up to 1 gram of metformin, but be cautious when you are using metformin in such type of patient. So when you are combining vildagliptin with metformin in a renal insufficiency patient, I will suggest it is better to give it separately instead of giving in a combination pill, because each drug may need to be modified according to the downgoing eGFR level.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Dr. Jimit, you have a question from
Yes.
Dr. Badatsha. Can we record the conversation with the patient without patient consent, or with consent without any malintention?
So as I said earlier, there is an implied consent that patients want to consult with you. Definitely is our patients are not aware about these privacy issues. So for routine population, it may not be a problem. Okay? But for some patients and some educated patients, they are very worried about their privacy and they won't allow. But if you go through the guidelines, recent guidelines by government, that you should always keep all the records of this teleconsultation. So you should always record them. And many of the newer softwares have inbuilt facilities for them. So you can do it. And government also wants you to keep records. So Tamare, you have to keep these records with you. So ideally you should record them.
Okay, okay. Sir, Dr. Priyash, this question from Dr.
Yes.
Devraj. If Dr. Devraj is there, you can unmute and ask, but I'll read it. Dr. Piyush, can vildagliptin given 50 mg of those patients remain under control this?
See, first of all, it's totally wrong practice if you are giving vildagliptin once a day, because vildagliptin is a drug which inhibits DPP4 enzyme more than 94% only if it is given twice daily. And actually speaking, vildagliptin is quite efficacious in comparison to other gliptin only if it is given in a BD dose. So if patient is having a very good control, for say if somebody is having HbA1c of 5.9, and if you reduce vildagliptin to once a day, what will happen that around 12 to 14 hours of the day, patient will have a good DPP4 inhibition, but that is also not more than 80% if you use only once a day. And rest of the time, it is not even 80%, which is the basic DPP4 inhibition required for sugar control. So I will suggest don't use vildagliptin OD unless until if it is must or patient is developing hypoglycemia. Sometimes what happens in patient with some renal compromise, what I already told, or sometimes patient are having early morning hypoglycemia. In such type of patient, you may choose, but otherwise it is ideally not to be used once daily. It is a BD dose and you should give it twice daily.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question from, I think this, 1 minute, sir, it's just moving. There was, okay, Dr. Nimish Shah, sir. For Dr. Jimit, telemedicine and CPA.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
Telemedicine and CPA.
Consumer Protection Act. Jimmy.
Protection Act. Yes, the acts, all these that apply for the physical consultation, all those acts apply on the telemedicine also. And we are liable for the same consequences as for physical consultation at our OPD as for the telemedicine. And as I said, there are few misconducts also that are additional for telemedicine. As I said about the privacy issues and all these, the photographs and all these videos, if you take or capture, there are additional misconducts also. So same thing applies for the telemedicine as it applies for the physical consultation at your OPD.
Okay, thank you. So if anyone would like to ask the question, please unmute your mic and ask the question, please.
I would just like to add to Jimit for teleconsultation.
Yes, sir.
Keep three things in the mind. That what Jimit told, that either you do teleconsultation or you are doing in-person consultation, do the thing in good faith. Do it for patient's benefit, not for your personal gain or for just because you are not able to work in your OPD, you are doing teleconsultation. No, it should be done for patient benefit. If you have good faith, nobody is going to challenge you. That is very important thing. Second, whatever law is applying to your in-person clinic is going to apply in telemedicine. And third thing, that always keep an habit to record. And it is record doesn't mean that you are recording live video. Recording is means whatever you are taking, whatever you are asking, write a note, what are the symptoms, what are the diagnosis. If you do this thing, there won't be any problem. I don't think so.
Sir, there are no questions. Dr. Jimit, I would like to ask, if a person, you are seeing your patient for the first time, do you still prefer to use telemedicine, or first visit you say you want to see physically and all your old patient you continue? There are some doctors who have this view. So what is your view on that?
No, as I said earlier, as for guidelines also, you can see a patient first time via telemedicine. So this can be possible. But what you need to do first, as I said, you need to first do trial that it is an emergency case or not. Second step is you need to decide by yourself that this patient can be managed via telemedicine or not. If you feel at any point of time that this cannot be managed via telemedicine, you should ask the person to come in person. So this is the thing. For first time, you can definitely do telemedicine, no problem. But you should always consider these 2 points: that price is there and emergency requirement is there or not, and actually it is telemedicine is feasible in this particular case or not. That you have to decide. If you feel that it can be easily done by telemedicine, you can definitely do by first time also, follow up also, no problem.
Dr. Piyush, you would like to add something to that?
No, I think I would I can say a bit conservatively. First time consultation I will see in person only. So I have instructed myself because I am using telemedicine for quite a while now. But if person is seeing me for the very first time, then I will say it is better to be in person, taking detailed history, because sometimes we may miss a few things. So it depends on how well versed you are with technology. I feel that a new patient should be there. And second thing, that because we cannot check the weight, we cannot sometimes check blood pressure. It is only about report and the patient complaints. So physical examination also needs. So what Jimmy told, I will reaffirm that at least if we are teleconsulting once, then on a next visit, patient should come in person so that we can check other vitals also, which are also as important as their blood reports.
Actually, sir, majority of the specialist, other specialty people are being diabetologists are best placed for telemedicine compared to all other specialties.
It is very true, because in diabetes, even in thyroid, because we are seeing other endocrine patient, thyroid, we mostly rely on patient symptoms and reports rather than other vitals and other physical examinations. So definitely yes, for diabetes, for blood pressure management, for thyroid management, we may go for telemedicine very easily in comparison to neurological and onco patients.
So there is one question by Dr. Navneet Vadgama. What are differences between e-consultation and telemedicine? Sorry, e-consultation and telemedicine.
So e-consultation is same as what we have seen. The patient consult digitally to you. Telemedicine as a whole, you can see a prospect how we can consult the patients online without seeing in person. So I think both are same thing. Telemedicine also includes health education that I want to add. While e-consultation is just a consultation for a visit. So telemedicine, as by definition, as I said, also includes health education, continued medical education for doctors also. What we are doing
everything, what we are doing is also telemedicine. True. So e-consultation is a part of telemedicine.
I think that's a lot of the questions, sir. I think no more question. Should any participant would like to ask directly any question?
There is one other question, that how long should we keep
now it's just come. How long should we keep WhatsApp chat? Can a person do even with free consultation? Dr. Pavan.
Yeah. For free consultation, as I said, the other acts also, previous acts, Indian Medical Council, even you are providing free consultation, you are under all the laws that can be applied as a physical consultation. Even I am seeing free patient free of charge. Even if I am not eligible to do misconduct or use anything else, or I am not free from any penalty if I give free consultation. So this should be clear cut. Even if you are giving free consultation, you are liable for all the acts or all the consequences. And if you take fees or not, doesn't change anything. And I think for WhatsApp chat, there are no specific guidelines. Government has said you will need to keep them. And for other records, OPD records, 2 and 2.5 years, you need to keep records. But there are no specific guidelines for WhatsApp chat. They have said that WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger you can use as a medium for teleconsultation, but there are no specific guidelines for it.
So there's one more question that came in, Dr. Shirish. What is the medium of teleconsultation, like WhatsApp?
So you can use any medium. You can use any medium from the government guidelines. WhatsApp, Facebook, EMR softwares, telemedicine softwares, anything we can use.
I think I would say where you can keep record easily for a long time. For example, EMRs. are definitely better than WhatsApp or other telephonic consultation. But in this period, when people are not used to keeping EMR and everything, and now suddenly they shift to telemedicine, yes, you can use WhatsApp, you can use Facebook Messenger, whatever. But if you are thinking of going to take this for long term, then I will suggest any EMR based teleconsultation is better than WhatsApp call, because in WhatsApp you cannot keep record. See, after 2 months, somebody is asking for the previous record. How you will able to maintain on WhatsApp? So it is always better with a proper registration, contact history, detail history, everything will be there if you are keeping EMR. So EMR based telemedicine is anytime better and safer.
Okay, so there are lots of positive comments here. Thanks, Dr. Piyush Bhai, Dr. Jimit Bhai, excellent talk. And thank Dr. Piyush Desai and Dr. Jimit Bhai, excellent presentation during lockdown situation. There are lots of thumbs ups and so lots of positive comments here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for patient listening. And I think that two things we will definitely do after this webinar. One is treat our diabetic patient early with any combination and the best possible combination. And in this scenario, we should use telemedicine, but wisely. That is what I would like to end. Thank you.
Great message. Thank you.
Thank
So,
you.
So now,
yes,
ma'am, I request,
Mr. Rashi Santosh Sarangi, over to
yeah.
you.
Thanks to everyone. Now I'll request Mr. Kunal Kakre to give the vote of thanks to our faculties.
Yeah, good evening all. First of all, thanks to Dr. Piyush sir, Dr. Jivin Murgam, who has accepted our invitation in a short period of time. And I must say that our to make our webinar very successful and interactive, under guidance all the faculty members. I convey my sincere thanks to all participant delegates to spare their valuable times. My marketing head, Dr. Gokul, who arranged this webinar, and my team who puts efforts further made the CME successful. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.